the first matchup is going to break my heart. I had a list of top 5 games. This is for sure, both these are my top 3. It's hard for me to pick number 1 and like rank them, but these for sure are 2 of my top 3 games. That is Resident Evil and Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Wind Waker, I love the story behind it. People hated it. When it first was announced, people thought it was so trash the way it looked and everything, that it was a child's game. People ended up falling in love with it. Has a couple of flaws that we talked about last time, like the Triforce questing and stuff, but overall, it's a phenomenal game with incredible dungeons. It's my favorite Wind Waker or Zelda soundtrack. There's so much to praise it for that it's hard to, knock it. On the other hand, we have Resident Evil, a very opposite experience. We have a lot of games that started genres. Resident Evil is no different. It picked up survival horror, and it really brought to light this. And I'm going to touch on it to start, I think, so I'll save this point for a second, but it did a lot with limitations. But it's a classic game. It started an incredible franchise that went in a weird direction later, but we're not worried about that now, are we? Resident Evil, at its core, was a great survival horror experience. And so I'm going to start the conversation, and then, I'm sure Nick will chime in with Wind Waker and Travis and all of them, but I want to start by saying Resident Evil did something that, I don't want to bring Mario 64 back up in other games, but to me, Resident Evil took the limitations of the system it was on and made it work. And the first key evidence I have is the camera angles. Having a fixed camera that doesn't move and switches added to the horror, and it also moved past the bad camera, because games back then, N64 games had awful camera angles, didn't they, Nick?
N64?
Right?
Yeah, it did.
PlayStation was no better. PlayStation had awful camera angles as well. They just weren't mastered, and that's fine. But Resident Evil said, we want to make a fun survival game. We need camera angles that work. So instead of just having a bad camera that doesn't follow you correctly, they used fixed camera angles that doesn't let you see what's coming around the corner. So they just took a limitation and turned it into an advantage for them that people fell in love with. That even the HD remake still used it, because it's a core mechanic that people love. And so this game would not have aged well, and it didn't age perfectly, to be fair, but it would have aged a lot worse had it not been creative with how it fixed it. And so I think this game did a wonderful job of working around its limitations. That's just something I wanted to bring up because I didn't mention in the first one. On top of that, it started survival horror. It's very basic. You explore a mansion. You come across different boss fights that are very unique and interesting. There's different enemies. It's a cliched zombie game, but it's also really not. There's a lot of enemies that don't even look anything like zombies. And when you get into the lore of the game, you realize there's a lot of depth to it in terms of the virus that goes around and how it affects people. And you hear these awful, sad stories about the characters in it. And this is all there if you explore. If you don't explore and you just brick through the game, you don't learn a lot about it. This game definitely promotes exploring and moving around. And ironically, Wind Waker's the same with exploring. And so, I think this is where I struggle is Resident Evil was a great exploring game for a horror game. Wind Waker is a great exploring for a fantasy adventure game. And so I'll let someone else talk about Wind Waker if they want to, but I think that's the first thing that I'm struggling with.
I want to bring in a point just saying that Resident Evil was the start of its series, and Resident Evil has kind of stuttered in points, and I remember you talking about it a lot with Resident Evil 5. How Resident Evil 4 was very different than what they're really doing before, but I would say that a lot of people would say that Resident Evil 4 is their favorite, or Resident Evil 2. I know Resident Evil, the original, is your favorite.
That's actually...
Wind Waker is...
Yeah, before I go on, because I'm sorry, but that's one thing I did want to mention too, before I forget, that's the other thing, is Resident Evil 4 was great and everything worked up, but when they wanted to fix the franchise with Resident Evil 7, every fan said, do what the original did, right? That's what fans said.
Yeah.
Stop doing this. Go back to the original. So it shows people even still admired the Resident Evil. They didn't like the changes. They wanted it to stick with the original. So that's all I wanted to say with that.
It has good roots.
Right.
Yeah, but the reason I want to point out with Wind Waker being released around the middle of it is that Legend of Zelda, especially when you've... The reason I bring it up is because, especially when you look at the beginning series of games, I don't think any game series is able to be exempt from this rule. Usually, if you have a beginning game that's beloved by everybody, like, oh my gosh, say the original Super Mario Bros, such a fantastic game, I can't believe it, I just can't believe what they're gonna do next. They either overshoot their boundaries and make something that not many people want, and people they have to push back a little bit, or they do another thing that's good, and they're at risk of it getting stale, and people are saying it's just the exact same thing. So people are going to complain about one thing or another. But the reason I say that is with the Legend of Zelda series, it already went through those iterations. Resident Evil was at its core, and it was able to keep what it had all the way through the end as what people still want. But the Legend of Zelda formula, it's kind of had a little bit of a rougher road, and I would say around the time of Wind Waker is when it peaked in terms of the Zelda formula is almost perfect, let's keep it like this, and they kind of overstepped their boundaries when I would say it came to Skyward Sword and whatnot. So, well, I want to point it out. Sorry.
No, I was going to say something to help you because I want you to talk more about this point. And Travis also, actually, because Travis is a good person, I think, to talk about this too.
Oh, boy.
My thing, and this is, I'm not going to insult any of these games, by the way. I'm going to be complimenting both no matter what. I refuse to argue against any of them. Wind Waker, I think, is the smoothest Zelda game out there control-wise. I think Twilight Princess was a little bit harder. Skyward Sword with the motion controls, obviously a lot of people didn't like it. I think Wind Waker has the smoothest controls. Would you guys agree?
As someone who has only
Besides
played
Breath of the
Ocarina
Yeah, Breath of the Wild
Time-
excluded, because that one's really recent.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
Except for, let's see, because I've only played Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, and Wind Waker. Wind Waker is the only Zelda game I have actually completed. I would definitely agree that it is definitely the easiest to maneuver around, and definitely didn't feel like clunky at all.
right, it was
So
very easy to learn.
I will speak to this. I will speak to your point, Mike. In terms of if somebody was trying to get into Legend of Zelda franchise and they're like, "What game should I play first?" Almost instinctively, I would say Wind Waker for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons, again, it's the most accessible. I think it hits on the high points of Legend of Zelda, on what staples of the series in terms of exploration, in terms of a great adventurous music, the dungeon design, the dungeon puzzles, all the items giving you different ways to interact with the world. All of those goes kind of hand in hand with a Legend of Zelda game, whether you notice it in the game or not. Even games like Adventure of Link, which I personally think is an underrated game, but that was an example of one of the ways that Nintendo kind of shot too far in a lot of people's opinion. I still think it's fantastic. I think more people should give it a lot of credit. The Adventure of Link is a great freaking game. It's hard, but it's really freaking good. But the reason I'm saying this is because both of these, I'm not sure if it's the same way with Resident Evil, where if you wanted somebody to get into the franchise, you want to give them, if you're recommending a game, at least from what I've seen, you want to give them a good baseline of what the series is, and a great experience on top of that. So if you're going to recommend what's the best Resident Evil game to play first, would you recommend the original Resident Evil?
Yes, I would.
Or would you recommend a different game over that?
No, I would recommend the original. I was actually going to say that Resident Evil 2 might be a little bit better. It's significantly harder. They will throw like 7-8 zombies at you at once that are all a lot faster. The first game is a lot tamer in terms of what it throws at you, so I think it's a good introduction to the series. That's why Resident Evil 2 is better, because it ramped up the difficulty in the setting, but I also think that's why it should be the second game. Resident Evil is a great baseline Resident Evil game. It's a good introduction to survival horror. I think that's why I'm so big on that game, and that's why I picked that one over Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 is good, but it's not a good game to start. Resident Evil is a great survival horror game at its core because it introduces you to some very basic things. And one of the things on a side note that I wanted to mention is the saving in the game. It does not let you save your game an unlimited amount of times. You have a limited amount of saves before the game will tell you, nope, no more saving. That is so cruel, but it does that because it doesn't want you just to retreat to a save room every time you make progress. It wants you to feel the fear of actually having to tackle the enemies without just, save before every hard encounter, You actually have to strategize with everything you do, but it's not overwhelming. The game isn't too long, it's not too difficult, the puzzles aren't too hard, so it's a good way to introduce those difficult mechanics, I think. And so it perfectly encapsulated everything you want in survival horror and made it in a way that's not too difficult to understand. I think Silent Hill is a bit more complicated in terms of the puzzles. Resident Evil 2 is a bit too difficult. Resident Evil 3, I think, is really difficult, especially if you do it on hard mode. Resident Evil 1 is a great baseline to learn about survival horror, is my opinion.
So because I know Mike's talking about a lot of Resident Evil, fine, I will go in to help out Wind Waker then, because
I know,
it seems like nobody else is.
It's just, I don't know.
Because it seems like nobody else is. So there's a couple of things that I think that are highlights of Wind Waker that not many other Zelda games do. Obviously, one of the big things that's a huge change is the sailing. But I will say in the original Wind Waker, the sailing can be a little jarring in terms of how long it takes to get from island to island, which is why speedrunners found a way to break that part. But one thing that Wind Waker has that not any other Zelda game has is basically like completing the map. You have certain certain parts of the game, like for example Majora's Mask, where you can buy parts of the map. But personally, one of my favorite things that I did in Wind Waker was complete the entire sea chart. I loved every second of that, where it's just like, oh, what's this island? What's this island? And it's a kind of exploration feel and a very good reward for an exploration to do. And then if you ever give more bait to the fish, you can play like a fun arrow mini game just because you feel like it. Like that kind of exploration and rewarding, I don't think, again, Mike, I haven't delved 100% into Resident Evil, but I've seen videos. I know what Resident Evil's about. I don't think Resident Evil can match that level of exploration and that level of rewarding a player for exploration.
It doesn't.
When none of it is necessary.
No, it doesn't. It what it lacks in exploration.
And that's a staple to Wind Waker, not other Zelda games.
Right.
Other Zelda games do not even reach an ounce of what you can do there.
I think what Resident Evil makes up for is the lore in its smaller area. So it all takes place in one mansion, so it is a lot smaller. It makes up for that with the incredible lore that the game has. So each room and each little, like even the piano you see has such a story when you think of, there's a story where like someone's playing the piano as someone is passing away trapped in a room next door. Like every piece of that has so much depth and there's a story behind everything. So even though there's not as much to explore, there's a lot more detail in everything. Wind Waker doesn't have as much detail in everything, I don't think. I was going to say on a different note, what Wind Waker does win in is boss fights. The boss fights are creative. You have to use different weapons and stuff. Resident Evil's boss fights.
Theme.
Yeah, Resident Evil's boss fights, shoot, run, shoot, and that's what all the boss fights in Resident Evil are. They're not very exciting. Resident Evil's never had incredible boss fights, so in that sense, I think Wind Waker wins. And obviously, like you said, the music and the boss fights are incredible.
Yeah, I will. A couple other things that I at least want to point out for Wind Waker is obviously the warping was fantastic. I loved exploring all the fairy fountains and everything. I think one of the last things I do want to mention for Wind Waker is the actual. I would say that this is probably the time when Zelda actually gave more of a crap for character progression or like character growth, because Ganon in Wind Waker is probably one of the most underrated characters that never gets talked about. The fact that when you're about to do that final boss fight, you actually have more of an understanding of why Ganon's doing this thing. Like he wants to see this kingdom going back to his fallen glory. He's not just doing this for being evil. It's not like Majora's Mask, where even though Majora's a great villain, it's not about just being bad. It's more, he has a motivation behind it. And in the same way, Zelda is not just a princess that was kind of just assumed into her role. She actually has character development. She was Tetra before that, and she came into that role like she reluctantly accepted it. All these characters had character growth that other Zelda games didn't really do much to promote. And I think Wind Waker doing that is what actually led us to Breath of the Wild Zelda, which again is the best freaking character in the Legend of Zelda series so far, in my opinion. That is a great start to what came down the road for the Legend of Zelda series. And its character growth was something that was missing for a long time.
So one thing I do want to mention, and I hate bringing this up, Resident Evil to me had no bad parts of the game. I enjoyed the game from front to the beginning to end. I think the game kept improving. There's some backtracking, but the backtracking is fun because things change as you backtrack. The world evolves around you. Nick, do you think Wind Waker from start to finish, every part of that game is good?
No.
And that's, I think, the fatal flaw for Wind Waker, much like the fatal flaw of Resident Evil is the boss fights. Wind Waker's fatal flaw is there's a big chunk of that game that isn't very exciting. Resident Evil's fun from beginning to end. Wind Waker has a big tedious part in the middle, or more towards the end.
Yeah.
So that's the other big thing is Resident Evil is the more consistent experience. The boss fights not being great isn't awful because the boss fights last like 2 minutes in an otherwise 6-hour game. Wind Waker has a couple hours there that get kind of boring, and so that's another factor I have to consider.
What's kind of unfortunate about Wind Waker is that's actually that's a result of the lack of development time that they had, because they had other ideas for dungeons that they were going to put in there, but they had to replace it with the Triforce Gathering.
Right.
It's better in Wind Waker HD.
Yeah, that's true. So we should probably start with the voting. I don't know who wants to go first with this.
It sounds kind of chaotic on Travis's end. Does Travis want to go?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, let's see. So, I don't know if I want to go first. I'm still trying to make up my mind.
Me too.
Fine, I'll do the one that's pretty obvious. I still have to give it to Wind Waker. Again, I have to always say this before. I don't think it's a bad game. I think it's a freaking fantastic game. In terms of the best Legend of Zelda game, though, that I've played, it definitely is not. But against Resident Evil, I know, Mike, you can debate this all you want, but the amount of, for Resident Evil, it just feels very confined and very restrictive for people to enjoy. I think Wind Waker doesn't get constrained by the same bounds. I think Wind Waker, more people can sit down and just love and play, and I just think that it speaks to more people. I do think accessibility shouldn't be the only thing that you judge it on, but everything about it was just fantastically done. The dungeon design was great, even though I hated playing the command melody all the times. It might be a more consistent experience from beginning to end, but Wind Waker has such a great message. It's done a lot for the franchise. a great overall game experience that I don't think everybody will get with Resident Evil, and I think more people would enjoy Wind Waker than Resident Evil.
I'm going to vote second because I don't want to have to be a tiebreaker just in case.
Okay.
My vote it's hard, but I'm going to vote Resident Evil. Only because I think what you just said, ironically, about Resident Evil made me want to vote for Resident Evil, because what you said is an advantage, I think. You feel confined. You feel restricted. And that's the point. You're supposed to feel trapped. You're supposed to feel like you're stuck in a place. There's a lot of locked rooms that keep you trapped and contained. Resident Evil mastered that. It gave you that feeling of dread and stress, and to me, it had the bigger impact, right? And that's what I want to go to when I'm stuck. And I told you that from the beginning. If I can't decide between two things, I have to go with the bigger impact. Obviously, Resident Evil had the bigger impact because it was the first survival horror game that did a great job. Wind Waker didn't have a big impact because it was just another 3D Zelda game that was incredible, but it didn't innovate the way that, Ocarina of Time and other ones did. So I'm going to give my vote to Resident Evil.
For me personally, when I was talking about the constrictive part, I was talking about the gameplay experience overall for people to enjoy it. I wasn't talking about how the game constricts.
Right.
I was talking about how...
No, but it popped that into my head. But I do see what you're saying. It's a smaller audience for survival horror. I will say, Travis, no matter what you say, I'm going to be happy with what you pick because I want both to advance. So...
Okay, let's see.
Pick whatever makes you happy.
Resident Evil does have the smaller... Well, because I don't even know if it actually has a smaller... Because I feel like... If you're not a Nintendo fan...
It's definitely more niche compared to Legend of Zelda.
It is. Well, different audiences, but Zelda's audience is children, which is a lot bigger than survival horror, so...
That's fair. Let's see. So Resident Evil definitely does a great job with the whole horror thing. Oh, God. I think I'm going to have to give my vote to Wind Waker because it is the only Zelda game I've actually completed because... I did love the actual exploration in it, and like Nick was saying, there was actually character development, whereas like in any of the other Zeldas, there's not really a huge.
Yeah, not till later ones.
Yeah, like Ocarina of Time, it's like, oh look, it's Ganondorf, he's evil, and then you see him running away with Princess Zelda, and you're like, okay, and then you don't really interact with too many people, and the people you do interact with are weird. So I'll give it to Wind Waker because it did build on some of the, like, Ganondorf's actual, like, upbringing and that he's not just an asshole. He's...
Yeah.
He meant
he's got
well,
motivations
he just
that
sucks.
doesn't make him bad, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's move it on. This one's gonna be harder than I think.
Yeah. So Pokemon Red and Ocarina of Time is our next matchup. This one's interesting. Pokemon Red and Ocarina of Time. I don't even know how to introduce them both. They're both iconic in very similar ways. Both are glitchy. They're not the best in terms of what they do, but they're both legends in terms of what they accomplished. Pokemon Red, with innovating the Game Boy, Ocarina of Time innovating the N64. Obviously, Z-Talk and Ocarina of Time wasn't the best. Obviously, the statistics and how the turn-based combat in Pokemon Red wasn't the best. But they both started something that ended up being incredible. And so, in terms of the impact they had, there's nothing to deny there. I know that's probably not the introduction Nick wanted me to give, but...
Oh, I don't care about your introduction you give.
Yeah,
I know how to defend my points.
Yeah, in terms of the impact, they both had incredible impact. Pokemon is a well-loved franchise. Zelda's a well-loved franchise. Both of these games deserve tons of respect, but only one can advance. I want to... Well, the thing I want to say is I'm going to poke and prod Nick in this one, but I'm not an expert in either of these, so I'm going to let Travis and Nick do a lot of the talking. I'm just going to prod them and see how much trauma I can cause, because it's funny.
What I want to say about these games, though, is these games are very great examples of very easy for newcomers, but very difficult to master. For the Pokemon system, you've seen it actually build like a competitive fan base and an actual meta. For Gen 1, very dominated by Psychic types because they were busted, but it was enough. It's basically enough for me to kind of start the conversation on both of these games, whether you see it or not. Like, again, Pokemon Red isn't difficult at all. I was able to beat it at 5 years old, and trust me, I was not a smart kid. But it's literally, you go through and you find Pokemon, you raise them, you level them up, you try to find their good moves, and then you try to go through the actual game itself.
It's a game meant for kids.
And for Ocarina of Time, you do the same thing. You kind of start learning from the beginning, and while I would say that Ocarina of Time gets harder as you go along, again, these games are very accessible. The one thing that I will concede to Pokemon Red, again, I'm not sure if people know this, Ocarina of Time is my favorite game of any game. I will say Pokemon Red does way, way better in terms of teaching through meaningful gameplay. and in terms of just seeing it as it go on. So like again, I think I mentioned it before in the first Sonic Adventure. As you go through, I think the point of like the early Pokemon like Caterpie, Metapod, and Butterfree, they're not supposed to be very powerful Pokemon that you get in the beginning, but it's supposed to teach you about evolution, and you learn about evolution without ever any like NPC going to you saying, hey, once a Pokemon reaches a certain level, they evolve. Like, you don't need somebody to tell you that because you just learn through playing the game. And that's one point that I will concede to Ocarina of Time, because for being the first 3D Zelda game, my god was it terrible with tutorials. Navi and Gaebora Kapora, I think that I'm pronouncing that right, were some of the worst ideas for just trying to, like, give a tutorial or trying to teach through the actual game itself. Pokemon Red, it was a simpler game, but it was definitely able to teach through the game, and basically made it feel more natural than Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time, you had people interrupting you left and right with Navi, like, look at this door, you might be able to open it if you press this button near it. Like, shut the hell up, Navi.
One thing I do want to mention too, and if I asked you which soundtrack is better, we'd probably all say Ocarina of Time. But what I will say is, if I asked you which soundtrack was more well known to the general population of this planet, would it not be Pokemon? If I asked someone to hum an Ocarina of Time or a Zelda song, I don't think my parents could do that. I think they could probably hum a couple Pokemon songs.
Because Pokemon has the advantage of also having a show that we watch obsessively.
But I think that's the thing. So in terms of being iconic, Ocarina of Time did a lot for 3D Zelda, and this is the point where I'm kind of stuck between the two, even though most people would say it's obvious Ocarina of Time, only because Pokemon Red led to some incredible things. It led to a TV show. It led to comics and cartoons and toys, and it created a dynasty because of how much people loved the game at the time. So yes, it was broken, but clearly people didn't care. People clearly...
I'm not holding the broken thing against it, because if I held the broken thing against Pokemon Red, I'd have to do the same thing with Ocarina of Time. I don't care about the broken part.
But I'm saying clearly Pokemon Red captured people's hearts more than Ocarina of Time, because Pokemon Red stuck with the general population, and people fell in love with Pokemon. It defined and created what handheld gaming is for Nintendo, and it drove it forward. Every single major handheld console has an iconic Pokemon game. They don't all have Zelda games. So clearly Pokemon dominates handheld, but now it's even creeping its way.
That's a completely different issue, though.
But what I'm saying is,
if it was up to Nintendo, they would have a Zelda game on every single console, but it depends on the actual person that would co-develop the game
And
itself.
the thing is, Zelda doesn't...
Capcom earlier on.
Well, and here's the thing, though. Pokemon, I don't know, I feel like it created the Game Boy, and it made it what it is. I know what you were saying yesterday.
It did not. I talked about this before. It did not create the Game Boy.
You keep
Tetris
saying that.
Was one of the biggest selling points for the Game Boy. It was not not just Pokemon.
That's not my point. You keep saying that, but that's irrelevant. Yes, Tetris was a good selling game, but I'm saying Pokemon was the defining one. Tetris was out long before the Game Boy. It's not like it started on a Game Boy. That game was already known. Tetris existed, and people knew about it. Pokemon,
because it was on the Game Boy, it became a better
it did not start
console.
on the. But that's not the point.
It didn't start.
I know, but people knew what Tetris is. I'm saying Tetris was already known and loved. So obviously when it came to Game Boy, people were going to fall for that. Pokemon was not, it did not exist before. It got its origins on the Game Boy and then grew to be loved on the Game Boy. So Tetris is irrelevant because it was already extraordinarily popular. So no shit, putting that on a Game Boy is going to make people love the Game Boy. Pokemon was not loved. When that was on the Game Boy, it was loved. And I guarantee you, Pokemon drove the future because there's not a Tetris on every handheld. So clearly Nintendo didn't say, oh, Tetris is amazing at being sold. We got to put this on every handheld, Pokemon was the one that they wanted to drive the future of handhelds. That's why I say that. Tetris didn't drive anything. It was just a means of making money. But Pokemon... Let me ask
you this, Mike. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, Pokemon is the mascot. When you look at DSs, how many DSs have Pikachu editions? Pokemon is the mascot of handheld Nintendo. Tetris isn't. Tetris just got them a lot of money. But Pokemon got them a lot of fame.
Mike, if we're talking about the Game Boy, how can Tetris innovate? How can Pokemon innovate? There's a clear one of those games that can definitely go farther than the other. Tetris was a one-trick pony. It was, and the most recent one is, I think, as far as it can go with Battle Royale Tetris. But Pokemon, it's 150 Pokemon. How do you make that bigger? Different worlds, different gyms, different Pokemon types, more Pokemon.
So I don't think it's fair, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's fair for you to say that, so Tetris is the one that made it. No, it's not. Tetris already existed and was popular.
I'm saying that Tetris was the reason why it sold well, though.
I've never once said Pokemon.
Tetris was packaged with the Game Boy, and that was the package and title.
I never said Pokemon is the reason it sold. I said Pokemon is what drove handheld forward. Pokemon is not the reason it sold.
You definitely did not say that.
Pokemon was the one that they wanted to drive the future of handhelds. That's why I say that.
Whatever. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
That's
to
the
Pokemon
point that
versus
he was
Pokemon.
trying to make.
Yeah, what I was trying to say is Pokemon is what drove the future of handhelds. It's
I
what
would
kind
agree
of
on that point then.
yeah, because I did say created. I didn't mean created in terms of selling. I mean created in terms of like making handhelds something that people must have. Right? Tetris is the reason people bought it. Pokemon is the reason people kept it. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, to bring Ocarina of Time in this, because we spent a lot of time talking about Pokemon, I said I wasn't going to talk, and look how much shit I've been talking.
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time, next couple matchups, I won't be talking a lot, because I don't have... So anyway, Ocarina of Time was iconic. It's legendary. It's an amazing game. It's glitchy, so is Pokemon Red. I can't deny that. They fall in line in the same ways of being innovative and awesome, but I feel like Pokemon Red had more of an impact. Because it created things. Like, Ocarina of Time didn't lead to Zelda cartoons and stuff, and the ones that it did sucked ass. So... I don't know. I feel like Pokemon Red just had a bigger outreach than what Ocarina of Time had. And so Ocarina of Time clearly had the bigger world. It was more expansive in terms of what it did in 3D. But to say it had the bigger impact, every other game in this bracket, I would agree. But I think Pokemon Red might win in that one. Pokemon Red might be the number one in terms of impactful games, except maybe Mario 64. So I don't know. I think this
And
is
yet
closer.
he didn't vote for Mario 64, and he was
Because
saying
it
that
sucks balls.
Well, but he also said that Impact would be a
You're-
tiebreaker, whereas he thought that they were not even close. So
Yeah,
This is my
Metroid Prime
personal-
is a
this
better
is-
game. If this was Metroid Prime and Pokemon Red, I pick Metroid Prime easy. But we're talking about two relatively glitchy games that were new to their system. So to me, there's a lot of ties. So I feel like I need
For me
convincing
personally, Mike-
one way or the other.
For me personally, Mike, I don't care about this whole impactfulness and whatnot. Yes, you can talk about the legacy that games have, but in terms of the game that stands alone, it is what I would consider is what would define like it's the best game. That's what we're basing this on. It's a very generic title for a reason because we wanted to see what our reasoning would be. So for best game, yes, their legacy would have to do it, but in my mind, it doesn't actually weigh in that much. If you're talking about I'll focus on what I usually think of when it comes to a game. One of the big ones I think of is replayability. Pokemon Red wins easy. I don't even have to go into that. In terms of an overall experience that you're going to get, I think Ocarina of Time does better. And the reason, what I was defending before with Super Mario 64 was the fun factor, the thing that you really can't capture unless you played it at a certain time in your life and like you were just absorbed into the game, and you can kind of try to cite like metrics about graphics, about gameplay, about boss fights. And you can like ignore the actual crappy UI or whatnot, but I think that in terms of Ocarina of Time and Pokemon Red, Ocarina of Time just is able to deliver on way more of an experience that Pokemon Red is just not able to do. Pokemon Red and every Pokemon game, and I stand by this, is a one-trick pony. It just is. Like, you do the exact same thing in every Pokemon game, and I love it. I freaking love that kind of Pokemon formula. I would say later on it kind of gets stupid and repetitive, but it just is bound to happen with a game series that like doesn't really innovate or kind of change with the times. And sorry, go ahead.
No, because I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, as a child, as a wee lad, I didn't play either of these games.
I only played Pokemon Red as a kid. I never played Ocarina of Time until later.
Yeah, I love exploring, and obviously exploration is unfair. Pokemon Red is the exploring game, whereas Ocarina of Time doesn't have its expansive world, so that's unfair to say that directly. But which game do you think would appeal more to a young kid that wants to go on an adventure?
Hey,
Pokemon Red or
guys,
Ocarina of Time?
there's someone here who played both of these games as a kid.
Which one was more of an adventure for you as a child,
Well,
Travis?
considering that I said F Zelda, like, I still haven't beaten it. Like, I've tried to beat it, and then the game glitched out again at, like, pretty much the exact same point that I got to as a kid. I'm just like, I don't want to do this beginning crap again for the 1000th time, because I always got screwed up on, like, the well area. But, like...
The well area? What are you talking about?
Under the well, the bottom of the well, bruh.
The shadow temple when you go in a well.
Oh, that's way later. I didn't think you got that far. Never mind.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, because
I
I
thought you were
got
talking about
scared.
like the well, like when you first arrive at Kakariko
No.
Village, I was like, you can't do anything with that
yeah,
yet.
right. Because I always got to that point as a kid, and like I don't think I ever like processed that I should go back as a kid and like do whatever to get the. I don't even remember what the items are, but like the truth singing thing. So like I'm just running around. I'm running through some walls and other things. I'm dying, and this is stupid.
Yeah, because Travis never found the lens of truth.
So
Exactly. That's
then,
the lens of truth.
Can
Thank
I
you.
ask you something then, Travis?
Yes.
Because since we're being negative on Ocarina of Time, and again, I'm not biased. I just like poking Nick, but they both have negatives. did you have any negative experiences with Pokemon Red as a kid?
Well, I
didn't.
I'm asking Travis, shut up!
As a kid, I'd probably say no, but I mean, I also just, I love Charizard, so I'd always get Charizard. And I would always end up with the exact same party because they were my favorite people.
Right.
And then, I started trying to actually, catch them all and doing all that stuff. But, I guess overall, not really. I kind of wish that after you beat the Elite Four that there was going to be, a harder challenge because you can beat the Elite Four pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
But, as a kid, I didn't really think about that. I was just like, oh, look, I beat the Elite Four, yay. My boy Charizard pretty much slaughtered everybody because he's so much overpowered because of his level, not because he's an overpowered Pokemon. Don't worry, Nick. I know he's not the best, but he's the best.
I'm not saying anything. I'm letting you have your turn.
I know.
I will say, I'll let you finish, Travis, because this is a break.
Yeah, but I don't think it's fair for me to be judging it based off of my 5-year-old self playing both of these games because obviously Ocarina of Time is so much more challenging. My dumbass self isn't going to appreciate the things that it went for. Whereas Pokemon Red, I could have a brain the size of a peanut and I would still be able to play it and beat it because it does introduce for turn-based combat the status effects, but I never once, and I'm quite frankly,
status effects and turn-based combat was way before that. They had them in Final Fantasy.
Right, but they were much more important.
In Final Fantasy, they're very important.
Exactly. But in Pokemon, I'm oh, I'm poisoned, whatever. I'll still just attack you. I'm going to ignore the fact that I'm poisoned, and maybe I'll heal it after. Whereas, in Final Fantasy,
Pokemon is ridiculous.
In Final Fantasy, if you get poisoned, you're going to want to get a freaking antidote ASAP. Otherwise, you're screwed.
For sure.
So
yeah, I totally
it
agree
was
with that.
great at introducing status effects, but not having it destroy you if you're, just don't do anything about it.
Yeah, and I will say strategizing in Pokemon is stupid unless it's competitive, obviously.
Right.
Pokemon Red is piss easy. You don't have to do anything. You just hit your best attack over and over again and you win. And I can guarantee that's the truth because that's all I ever did. Yep. I just pressed my best attack and then you'll win. I never once
had a status effect move on any of my Pokemon. It was all aggro, which would, I know, not work at all in the competitive scene, but it kicked all of the comms asses.
Well, and moves like Growl and stuff, I never use those because if I attack them, they lose health and then I win.
Exactly.
So the combat was kind of boring. The other thing Ocarina of Time does win in my head also is the withstanding factor. Pokemon Red is not well played today. Ocarina of Time is still loved in speedrun communities and stuff. Pokemon Red has kind of been replaced because there's a lot of better games that came after that weren't broken. So Pokemon Red had broken stuff that left it hard to play compared to new ones. Ocarina of Time was somewhat broken, but it's still fun to play and it aged pretty well. So that's the thing I have to get Ocarina of Time. It stood the test of time better. And I know that's something Nick doesn't look at a lot, but I don't know. I would
say, Mike, along that point, I would say that in terms of Ocarina of Time, yes, it's a very broken game. But if you're playing it through for the first time, you're not going to notice those broken areas. You will notice it in Pokemon Red.
I think unless you played
for Pokemon Red,
and then Ocarina of Time.
Well, I'm saying in Pokemon, in Pokemon Red, you will notice 100% accurate move miss. But in Ocarina of Time, if you just play through the game, you're not going to notice as broken of a game as it is. You're not going to be using infinite sword glitch to get out of the Kokiri forest early. You're just not going to because you don't know how to do any of that.
Glitches. I'm just talking about like the Z targeting, not working and being kind of a nuisance. Yeah, little things like that is more what I'm talking about. Pokemon Red is more obvious with glitches. Ocarina of Time is more noticeable with clunky gameplay, I guess. But again, that's what I'm saying. Between those two, I'd rather have the clunky gameplay than a broken experience. So, I don't know. It's tough, but we should probably vote because we've talked a lot about both now. So
I'm saving my points for Ocarina of Time, so I really hope it doesn't lose.
Yeah, well, I'll let you go first then, Nick, because yours is the most obvious.
Well, I'm not gonna say it unless I'm gonna have to vote. Let me vote second then, because if it's at risk of being lost, if it's at risk of losing, I have to add the points.
Travis, vote first. I want to hear you guys' closing thoughts before I vote. So, you want to start, Travis?
Okay, so I am still going to give my vote to Zelda, even though I personally am not a huge fan of Ocarina of Time. I've talked about this with Nick. He's told me I'm wrong.
Yeah, I know
so
he
many
doesn't
times.
like it, and I understand his reasoning.
But I don't want to take away Pokemon Red is one of my favorite games. It's so close which one I like more, Red or Silver. Because Gen
I'm more
1
Gen
and
fan.
2 are both definitely the ones I played the most. But like, there's really just not much there. Like I said, you can play Pokemon Brain Dead and you're still going to do everything. Team Rocket is barely a story. Catching them
Yeah.
all is really not a story. It's fun to explore, but like,
Right.
there's nothing there. And when I come down to it, I value a good story more than just fun gameplay majority of the time. So
Yeah, and I will say the hardware of the Game Boy didn't really allow for a great story to really be told. So, I mean, it could have been a hardware limitation, but I mean...
I mean, every single Pokemon game that's come out after, it's the exact same crap.
They never even tried to really
If
push
it's
the
not
story.
Team
The best they've
Rocket,
done, I
it's
think, is
Team
Gen 5.
Aqua or Team Magma, or right? That Magma's the other one.
I was going to say Gen 5, though, I think has a pretty damn good story.
I
Black
don't.
and white?
Okay,
Either
black
way.
and white. Okay.
All right, so you're up, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to save more of my points, especially if this. Zelda will win because Travis already voted for it. But I am gonna save more of my points for when it faces off against Wind Waker. To keep it brief, I think that in terms of dungeon design, it's fantastic. I think again the place where it's the weakest is the tutorials, and people give it as much shit. Speedrunners find ways to literally avoid the tutorial text because of how bad it is. But in terms of core gameplay, in terms of how it was able to create such a full experience on the Nintendo 64 and to create a game that was massive for the time into that small of a cartridge, it's still breathtaking to me. And again, I never played Ocarina of Time until I had a GameCube, and I was still amazed about what the actual game can do. Maybe that was because I was playing it around the same time as Sonic Adventure, but still, like, it was amazing what Zelda Ocarina of Time can do compared to that. So I'm gonna save most of my points, but there's a lot more that Ocarina of Time doesn't get credit for with subtext that I'll probably be talking about in the next matchup.
Okay. And my vote doesn't matter, but I'm gonna say it anyway and give my little closing thoughts. If Pokemon Red had Gen 2 gameplay, I probably would be more inclined to vote for Pokemon Red. My tiebreaker was going to be biggest impact, and to me, Pokemon Red won that one. That's why I wanted to poke and prod to see what would happen. At the end of the day, the big selling point for me is Pokemon Red is a broken experience. Ocarina of Time is slightly flawed for the time period it came out in, but outside of that, it is legendary with incredible music, incredible story, incredible boss, incredible characters. Like, poor Z targeting is not enough to shame that legacy, and so to me, there's no tiebreaker to be had. Ocarina of Time is clearly superior, so I was hoping to see maybe if I could weasel something, but obviously it's not. Ocarina of Time is clearly the superior game, even if its legacy wasn't as monumentous. Its legacy is third best on this list, I would say, so I don't know. It's hard to beat that. It's going to be hard to take down Ocarina of Time, so obviously my vote's going there.
All right, we talked a lot. Bye, everybody. Sorry.
Bye. I'm looking forward to Zelda versus Zelda next round.
Oh, God.